Back in the Netherlands, back from Paris, I just told, I worked on Who Knows What a Woman Is. By the way, that article from '85, it was published, was translated in 2015. It's online, you can read it in English. So there were no jobs, but I was studying political science and I was teaching for 1.5 hours a week. I was teaching philosophy to district nurses. It was quite fun. I was younger than all the students, but it worked. It was fun. They had a lot to teach me about life. So then I got in '84. I got a job. At the time, being a PhD, writing a PhD was not a student position in the Netherlands. It was a junior job. And this was actually shifting. The generation before me used to write their PhD a bit like the Habilitation in Germany. They would write it when they were 40, 45 as a sort of conclusion to a lot of work. So we were the first generation more or less shifting to do that fairly early on in our call it careers, life. So I got this job in Groningen in the north, in the philosophy department. And the idea was that I would write a thesis and teach. And I did the thesis audaciously again with Peter van Lieshout, with whom I had written the MA thesis. He had also been to Paris and he was also my partner. But he had another job. He had a job in a mental health research institute and he had 2 days for his thesis. Now, being a good feminist, I thought, well, that's 2 days for me too. So that's how I had 3 days, both for the feminist articles and for teaching. And strange in current light, I was allowed to plan my own teaching. These were master courses. So I did one year, I did, for instance, one on order, chaos, and norms, Canguilhem Foucault Serre. So another year I did one on biology and sociology, not biology, the biological and the social, and I had text from Donna Haraway and from Marilyn Strathern messing up the biological and the social, and another year I did one on care and what is care, and so interestingly these are all also topics that I have been working on for 40 years afterwards. So I have took them. Is it 40 years? Whatever. I have taken them with me, and I was allowed to teach them at that time, so that was a privilege, and it was interesting to do. So at the same time, we wrote this thesis, and we were supervised by, our main supervisor was Lotte Nauta. He was a very interesting Dutch figure. He was a very outspoken public intellectual and also a philosopher, and he had also seminars and he would tell endless stories, and he was a really vibrant figure, and many philosophers of my generation who wanted to do things a bit differently were supervised by him, and he really left a big mark. There were also Gerard de Vries, who was also a philosopher, and there was Jan van Es, who was the general practitioner who would also supervise me in my master's, and there was Bertolt Gersons, who was a social psychiatrist. And we wrote this thesis that was a semiotic history. It was really a semiotic analysis of 40 years of journals in general practice, which was my field, and mental health care, which was Peter's field. So we analyzed these journals in a semiotic way, but this of course was before it was all online. So we really went into the library and wrote down notes, wrote down interesting passages, and then analyzed them. And that was published as this book, Ziek is het woord niet. Disease is not the word for it. and the subtitle is Medicalization, Normalization, and the Changing Language of General Practice and Mental Health Care from 45 to 85. And so this semiotic analysis, to give you just a sample of one of the things we did, what we showed is that in the 50s, disease was the word. So both in healthcare and both the general practitioners and mental health care, they thought the doctors took it as their task to heal disease. But they no longer did that in more or less the 60s when they thought they had to solve a problem, and that was bigger. For instance, a person could have a bad leg, and then the disease was something in the leg, but the problem was also that they lived on the 4th floor and couldn't go up and down. And the general practitioners thought, well, we have to cater for that too. After a few years of that, the wind changed, and there was this idea, but we can't cater for all the problems in the world, because that was more or less the feeling they had that they had to solve everything. And good, there were so many problems. The life was so much more miserable than for so many people who they saw in their consulting rooms that they had thought. So then they thought, no, we shouldn't do that. We should just answer the request of the patient, the Hulpvraag. The Hulp is help, Vraag is in that specific, is question. So what does the patient ask from us? So they catered to that. And Vraag in Dutch, interestingly, is question, but it also means, it also translates as a demand on the market. So early 80s, they no longer were in a conversational metaphor, answering a question, but they suddenly shifted to a market metaphor. Should we have what offer should we, how should we meet the demand, etc. So that kind of semiotic differences we disentangled. We also did this about the relation between individual and society, but if I also tell you that, we're here until 3 further days. So this was embedded in an analysis of medicalization theories and normalization theories, because we had to do theory, we were in the philosophy department, and so we made a comparison between the English language and the French language social theorizing, which was a very Dutch thing to do. So we're here in the Netherlands, we have this small language that nobody but outside of the Netherlands in Flanders reads. So we read these things from elsewhere. So we were comparing them. By the way, we were not so modest, so we didn't just compare them. We also argued that our materials really didn't fit in either, that they were both far too grandiose in their schemes, and that the moralization that the English language tradition thought was going on was not just what was going on, was only a very small part, that there were all, let's say, with questions for help, other things are going on, and that normalization theorists were far too much dreaming up one coherent order, while we saw constant shifts and differences. So rather than pushing the doctors in their cage, which was what the medicalization theory, to go a bit quick, was arguing for, or than saying there is this one order, we have to escape from it, we argued that what was interesting to do in relation to a field like that is making differences and disentangle. In a way, what I had also been doing with Who Knows What a Woman Is. Not one answer, but many answers. So we here saw medicine is not one coherent way of thinking. There are all these different, one after the other, but also coexisting ways of ordering. So again, this is sort of a constant theme. I'm fairly, well, you can call it consistent, you can call it inflexible, but I have these themes that I keep pursuing, and this was another one. No grand scheme, specificities, and really going for details and differences. Now that book was in Dutch, and at the time we did more things in Dutch. It was a quite lively scene. We had all these all these journals. For instance, there was also Crisis. This has a Marxist background, hence the Crisis. And the special issue that I show you here, is where with 6 of us we introduced Boltanski and Thévenot's work into Dutch. I mean, this was also a typical Dutch thing to do. You import something, you show, hey, there's this great stuff going on in France. We had actually earlier with a few other people, we had written a review of laboratory life written by Latour and Woolger, Steve Woolger. We had done that also in Crisis, and that was great fun because we had one page with a positive review and one page with a negative review. We didn't agree, so we had split up the positive and the negative review. There was this other journal, Kennis en Methode, Knowledge and Method, that came more out of philosophy of science and later also science and technology studies. This is a special issue I did with Hans Habers on the nature of things, the aard der dingen, the character of things. So that was also early 90s. So that was early 90s. So we had these vibrant Dutch discussions that were partly about introducing stuff, partly about attending to topics. There are quite a few articles here that are really interesting. This one is referring to an article of Maya Gastelaars about toilets and the relevance of toilets as things. So then in '88 I went to an EAST conference, the European Association of Science and Technology Studies, and I had all this stuff, the article on the woman and all kind of other stuff, and I could read more or less what everybody else was doing, well, because it was either German, French or English, that was sort of, and nobody could read my stuff. And well, that was frustrating. So that because the Dutch stuff was good, but not just my stuff, the things we were doing as a collective, but it didn't travel. And that's from there I will pick up in the next episode.